Welcome to Behind the Insights, where we pull back the curtain to share real-world data, AI, and evidence generation insights from the industry's top thought leaders. I'm Maria Demko, and today I'm excited to be joined by Dr. Rich Gliklich, CEO of OM1. Previously, he was founder and CEO of Outcome, which he led from inception through its acquisition by Quintiles. Rich is well known in the areas of registries, outcomes, and analytics. He is senior editor of the landmark publication, HRQ Handbook, Registries for Evaluating Patient Outcomes, a User's Guide, and the PI for the Outcomes Measures Framework, which focuses on standardization of outcomes measurement. Welcome, Rich. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Maria.
So in today's fast-changing healthcare landscape, real-world data is reshaping how we generate evidence. Where will the biggest shifts happen in the next few years?
Let's start the discussion with some terminology, just so we're all on the same page, because real-world data is used in a lot of different ways. I prefer to think of it as data generated in the normal course of providing and paying for care. So that data can be useful for both retrospective and prospective research application, as well as, which we'll hopefully talk about, training models for personalized medicine. So getting to your question about shifts, let's also think about real-world data in terms of uses more than as kind of one thing. So real-world data serves as data for discovery, data for modeling, data for understanding patient journeys, data for planning clinical trials, passive data to be combined with active data within clinical trials, data for finding and educating providers, data for finding and educating patients about treatments, and so on. All of these uses are set to grow. On a different front, what I call passive data, or data from the normal course of care that is collected in an automated way, will drive down the cost of clinical studies and registries dramatically. Finally, retrospective data, or data that's already been collected, and even if it's updated, will become the backbone of personalized medicine. So it's a lot of things to expect from the generic topic of real-world data.
Clinical trials are known for being costly and time-consuming. What are some of the most promising innovations addressing these challenges today?
Great question. Let's start with phase 2 studies, which are typically single-arm trials to start to understand safety and efficacy. In that scenario, we use data to generate digital twins, meaning a pseudo-control group. What would happen to that patient if they did not actually have the treatment or the investigational device, to help make decisions that might lead to a decision not to do a clinical trial. In other words, you also want to know the negative. What would happen if you planned a phase 3 trial based on phase 2 data and it did not turn out well? Understanding that might lead to saving tens of millions of dollars. Moving on to phase 3, the earliest innovations that we can see using these types of data are in trial planning and protocol feasibility. I like to think about it as measure twice, cut once. First, we want to use data to better plan trials, and that is the first step to lowering costs. We see our data better identifying which inclusion and exclusion criteria will ultimately have the most impact on enrollment speed, which is critical in any kind of phase 3 study. And then we see data derived from our models, and particularly our Pheno model, being used for testing protocols for patients who are likely to have adverse effects in populations or selected cohorts that are likely to have adverse effects. That's an entirely new area, but one that's incredibly exciting. Moving into phase 4 studies, pragmatic trials, post-market commitments, and patient registries, passive data automation, I think, is the big one. What do I mean by that? Well, manual data entry into electronic data capture systems has been around since the early 1990s and has changed very little. Electronic medical records to electronic data capture systems to date have not been good enough for a lot of reasons that we can talk about. But now, automation using passive data sources is in fact the way to dramatically lower the cost of trials.
OM1 has launched a Center of Excellence to advance real-world evidence. What drove that decision and what impact has it had so far?
Yeah, thank you for that question. In 2020, our team published the fourth edition of Registries for Evaluating Patient Outcomes, a user's guide with the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. In fact, our team has been publishing that going back to 2007. And that book serves as the international handbook on how to design, operate, and analyze observational studies and registries, and it has been used extensively for regulatory documents and guidances that have come out over the last 5 or 6 years. So clients have reached out to us to get more specific guidance on designing and operating their registries and large observational studies, follow-up studies, large phase 4 studies. So we created a center of excellence with some of the authors of that handbook to provide exactly that expertise.
OM1 Aspen is known for automating evidence generation. How does this work in practice, and what advantages does automation bring to researchers and healthcare stakeholders?
So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but let me expand on it. So I like to think of clinical trials and observational studies, et cetera, as a combination of active data collection, collecting that which does not exist in the medical record, things like clinical outcomes assessments that are scripted by the protocol and patient-reported outcomes and specific laboratories that may not be typically collected in routine practice. Whereas passive data collection is essentially recapturing or capturing information that does exist in medical records, lab systems, tumor registries, imaging systems, and so forth. Where automation really matters today is in capturing passive data without manual effort. A simple connection to a health system, backed by a lot of technology to process that data on the back end, fully traceable, fully auditable, makes that happen. And since passive data, meaning again, the data that's collected during the normal course of care and payment for care, is more than 80% of what most trials and studies collect, sometimes 100%, the savings can be enormous, and the reduction in burden to the sites, investigators, clinical research personnel, and even patients can be huge. In fact, we've measured exponential declines in costs by using this types of automation of passive data collection in studies from 1,000 patients to 1,000,000 patients, and it's really impressive.
Compared to traditional methods, how does Aspen improve both the speed and quality of data collection and analysis?
So my previous answer was really about cost, but let's think about speed and quality. Because data can be collected in bulk, if it has already been collected in systems of record for a patient, the time to collect can virtually go to zero. Now, if it's still to be collected, meaning we're following a patient prospectively, say in a long-term follow-up study, the time lag from when the medical encounter occurs until the data is available also can drop dramatically from what would be typically quarterly or biannual visits to very, very close to the time of the encounter. So the speed improves closer to the time that the data is actually generated. And obviously, that enables you to do analysis more rapidly because you have more patients being complete within the system.
With so many different therapeutic areas requiring nuanced data collection, scalability is key. So how does Aspen ensure scalability and flexibility to meet these diverse demands?
So Aspen stands for Automated Study Platforms for Evidence Generation. So Aspen scales incredibly well because it's not manual. Electronic processing systems don't care if they're processing 100 cases or 100,000 cases. The key is ensuring the quality of the extractions, and that is done by vigorous quality control and validation.
Now let's talk about a real-world example. OM1 has collaborated with a leading pharma company on a large-scale breast cancer screening registry. What made this approach unique, and what advantages did it offer over traditional registries?
Essentially, the study you're referring to collected data from over 60 facilities and followed more than 1 million women over several years. So Initially, it's the largest study ever done of its type. And to give more detail on that, about 300 individual data variables were collected for each subject, often on multiple points in time, 2 to 3 times what you would see in even a large trial or study. And site satisfaction has been sky high with net promoter scores over 70. To put that in perspective, a net promoter score over 20 is considered to be good. Over 70 is astronomical. And costs, again, were exponentially lower than traditional methods, tens of dollars per subject versus hundreds to thousands in a typical study.
As we look ahead, what do you see on the horizon for data automation and clinical trial optimization? What advancements should we be paying attention to?
First, data automation just keeps getting more robust with artificial intelligence, and that also translates to lowering cost. Second is the adoption curve. Sponsors and trialists accepting these approaches will be the tipping point. This is a very conservative industry. At this point, we have the technology and we have many increasing proof cases available. When adoption of automation of passive data collection hits the early majority, as it's described in a typical adoption curve, it will become the norm for all studies, and I'm predicting that'll happen within a year of hitting that early majority phase, much faster than most adoption curves. So just look out for that time when we actually hit that tipping point, which I think is coming in the next couple of years.
So one final thought. If you had to describe the future of real-world evidence in one sentence, what would it be?
It may be a long sentence, but data about patients as recorded in their real-world healthcare encounters has always been critical to research, but now we have ways to leverage it at a much greater scale for both retrospective and prospective studies, as well as for personalized medicine.
Thank you so much, Rich.
Thank you, Maria.
To our audience, thank you for tuning in. You can find more information on OM1 Aspen and our real-world data networks on our website, om1.com, or follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X. If you'd like to be notified about our next episode, be sure to subscribe to our email list and keep updated on the latest insights. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again next time.